The hands that wouldn't stop shaking. It started on a cold evening in Vancouver. The kind of evening where the sky looked like it had been painted with gray smoke, and the wind whispered through the streets like a memory trying to return. Outside, the movie theater, a long line of people waited. Most of them had phones ready, eyes sparkling, voices buzzing. They weren't just here for any movie. They were here because Keanu Reeves was rumored to be making a surprise appearance. But for one girl in the crowd, the reason was something entirely different. Her name was Emily. She was 19, small in frame, and wrapped in a coat 2 sizes too big. She had borrowed it from her neighbor, an old woman who often watched her from across the hallway with quiet concern. Emily stood in line, clutching a worn-out notebook against her chest, her fingers trembling, not just from the cold, but from the battle she had been fighting silently inside her head. She had traveled 7 hours by bus, skipping meals, hiding, her fears from her father who hadn't spoken to her in weeks. It wasn't just about meeting a celebrity. It was about something deeper, something she hadn't told anyone, not even her best friend. In that notebook was a letter, not a fan letter, not even a request for an autograph. It was a letter of thank you. A thank you to the man whose movies had helped her through the darkest season of her life. Emily had been struggling with anxiety and depression. 2 years ago, after losing her mother and being isolated at school, she found herself standing on the edge, both physically and emotionally. Then one night, when everything felt too heavy, she stumbled across a video. It was Keanu, speaking softly in an old interview. He had said something simple. No matter what happens, you're still here. And being here means something. That one sentence stopped her from making a choice she wouldn't have come back from. She played that video over and over until it felt like a lifeline. And now, 2 years later, she was standing in this line with trembling hands, hoping to find him. Not for a picture, not for fame, but just to say those words back to him. Thank you for helping me stay. As the doors opened, excitement surged through the line. The crowd began pushing forward, and Emily's notebook slipped from her arms and fell to the pavement. Panic gripped her chest. She knelt down to pick it up, her fingers frozen and clumsy, her breath growing shorter with every second. Someone stepped over her, muttering something impatient. Another fan bumped into her shoulder, not noticing the panic in her eyes. The world felt like it was closing in again. And then, a hand reached down. It was warm. Steady. Is this yours? A calm voice asked. She looked up, and time stopped. Keanu Reeves was standing there, not in a suit, not surrounded by security, but in a simple, dark jacket and jeans, like he had just walked out of the city itself. He wasn't smiling like a celebrity forced into a photo. He was looking at her, not through her, but at her, like she mattered, like she was seen. Emily tried to speak, but her lips trembled and all that came out was a shaky breath. She nodded, her hands reaching for the notebook, but her fingers wouldn't stop shaking. Keanu didn't just hand her the notebook. He knelt beside her on the pavement. "You okay?" he asked gently. The words crashed into her like a wave. She hadn't been asked that with real care in such a long time. Her lips quivered. She wanted to nod, to say she was fine, but the truth broke free. "I'm scared," she whispered, "and I don't know why." Keanu didn't rush, didn't try to fix it. He just nodded, like he understood more than he let on. "It's okay to be scared," he said. "You're still here. And that's something powerful." Emily's eyes filled with tears. She opened the notebook, pages fluttering from the breeze. She turned to the letter and offered it to him, her hands still trembling. "I wrote this," she said. "For you. I don't want anything. Just thank you." Keanu took the notebook gently, holding it like it was something sacred. He didn't look away. He read the first few lines out loud, his voice steady. You helped me when I thought no one could. You reminded me that being alive still had value. He looked back at her, his eyes misty now. Thank you, Emily, he said. Thank you for staying. The world around them faded. Cameras clicked. Fans murmured. But in that moment, there was only one thing that mattered. Two people, strangers in every way, bound by something deeper than fame. Something human. Keanu didn't rise immediately. He sat with her, right there on the sidewalk, holding her hands. They were still trembling, but now they were held, and slowly, they began to still. The whisper that echoed inside, Emily, couldn't believe it had happened. Even hours later, as she sat in the back of a quiet diner with her untouched cup of tea, the moment replayed in her mind again and again. The way Keanu had knelt beside her, the way he'd held her hands like they were made of something fragile, but worth protecting. And most of all, the way he had whispered those words. Thank you for staying. She hadn't told anyone yet, not her father, not even her friend Lena, who had sent a dozen texts wondering where she'd gone. She just sat there, the city lights blinking outside the window, and her notebook resting safely on the seat beside. Her. It was no longer just hers. Keanu had touched it, read from it, and his fingerprints, though invisible, were now part of her story forever. The door to the diner opened with a chime. Emily didn't look up until she heard footsteps stop near her booth. A waitress smiled down at her and placed a plate of fries on the table. "Compliments of the gentleman over there," she said, nodding toward a corner seat. Emily turned, confused. Sitting across the room was a tall man in a baseball cap. She couldn't see his face clearly, but there was something familiar about his posture. Calm, quiet, composed. He raised a hand slightly, almost shyly. She blinked. No, it couldn't be. He stood and walked over. As he removed his cap, the impossible became real again. Keanu Reeves. "Mind if I sit?" he asked gently. Emily's heart jumped. She nodded quickly, moving her notebook out of the way. "I saw you through the window," he said. "You looked like you could use some company." She tried to form words. Anything. But all that came out was a breathless, "You're here." He smiled slightly. "I like this diner. Good fries." She laughed softly, the tension melting from her shoulders. For the next few minutes they sat in silence, not the awkward kind, but the peaceful kind that comes when two people don't need to fill the air with noise. Then he spoke again. "What you wrote. That was one of the bravest things I've ever read." Emily looked down. "I didn't think I'd get the chance to say any of it." "But you did," he said. "And it mattered." She finally met his eyes. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Have you ever been scared? I mean, really scared?" Keanu leaned back, his gaze turning thoughtful. Outside, the night grew darker. The neon signs flickered softly on the window glass. "Yes," he said simply. "I've lost people I loved. I've faced days where getting out of bed felt like climbing a mountain. There were moments in my life where I didn't know who I was supposed to be anymore. And in those moments, yes, I was scared." He looked at her, voice steady. "But you know what helped me?" She shook her head. "People. Strangers sometimes. A kind word, a letter, even a smile on the street. Sometimes those little things made the biggest difference. And tonight, you reminded me of that." Emily felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that hadn't been there. "In a long time, I thought you were the strong one," she whispered, "the one who didn't need saving." Keanu smiled softly. "We all need saving sometimes, even the ones who look strong on the outside." They shared the fries slowly. No cameras, no crowd. Just two people with stories and scars. She told him about her mom, about the silence at home, about how school had become a place where she felt invisible. And he listened, not the way people pretend to listen, but fully, deeply, like every word mattered. "You know," he said finally, "sometimes the people who feel invisible are the ones who carry the greatest light." She looked at him with wet eyes. "You are not invisible, Emily. Not to me. Not to the world." The diner was almost empty when they stood up. Keanu reached into his coat and pulled out a small piece of paper. "This is a place I fund," he said. "They offer free counseling, mentorship, creative workshops. I think you'd love it." Emily took the paper like it was a treasure map. Maybe it was. "You think they'd take me?" she asked. He gave her the gentlest smile. "They'd be lucky to have you." They stepped outside together. The wind was cold, but her heart felt warm. The streets were quieter now, and the night didn't seem so heavy. Before they parted, Keanu turned to her one last time. "You said your hands were shaking when you met me," he said. She nodded. He reached out and gently touched her hand again. "They're not shaking now." And they weren't. They were steady, because she wasn't alone anymore. The voice that changed everything. The next morning, sunlight spilled through Emily's small apartment window, painting golden lines across the floor. She hadn't slept much. Her mind kept circling back to the night before, his voice, his kindness, and the way he made her feel. Not just noticed, but valued. She sat on the edge of her bed, the little slip of paper Keanu had given her still clenched in her hand. The name of the place was Lightbridge. It sounded warm, inviting, like a promise. She looked at it for a long time before pulling out her old phone and dialing the number. The woman who answered sounded kind, but professional. "Hello, Lightbridge Support Center. How can I help you today?" Emily hesitated, her voice catching in her throat. Hi. My name is Emily. I was told I could call by someone who supports your center." "Of course," the woman said warmly. "Would this be Mr. Reeves by any chance?" Emily froze. "Yes." "Then you're more than welcome, Emily. Let's get you set up." Later that week, Emily found herself sitting in a quiet room, a notebook in her lap, surrounded by 5 other young adults, all of them carrying invisible weight just like hers. One by one, they shared parts of themselves. Fears, stories, moments they hadn't told anyone. And when it came to Emily's turn, her hands trembled again. Not like before. Not from fear, but from the feeling of being ready to finally speak. She opened her mouth and let it all out. How her mother's laughter used to fill their tiny kitchen. How the day of the funeral felt like a cruel dream. How silence became her enemy. How school turned into a place of judgment. And how one night, when everything felt lost, she had nearly made a choice she could never take back. Then, quietly, she told them about Keanu, the video, the meeting, the diner. No one spoke for a moment. Then someone whispered, "That sounds like a miracle." Emily smiled through her tears. It felt like one. Outside the center, after the session, a young guy named Josh walked beside her. "You know," he said, "you just changed something in that room." She looked at him, confused. "Your story. It made me feel like maybe I'm not broken, like maybe there's still time for me." She didn't know what to say. But something inside her, something quiet and glowing, whispered that maybe, just maybe, healing wasn't just for her. Maybe she could help others too. Days turned into weeks. Emily started attending more workshops. She joined a poetry group. She began to draw again, and slowly, gently, she was becoming someone she almost didn't recognize, a version of herself that smiled more, breathed deeper, and walked with her head just a little higher. Then, one Saturday afternoon, her phone buzzed. It was a message from a number she didn't recognize. "Hey, it's Keanu. Hope you're doing okay. I was wondering, Would you be open to speaking at one of our youth events? It's small, just 20 people. But your story, it could change someone's life. No pressure. I just think you're ready." Emily stared at the screen. Was she ready? Her heart pounded. Her throat felt tight. But then she remembered the boy named Josh. The way he had looked at her after that group session. The way his eyes had softened. Maybe it wasn't about being ready. Maybe it was just about being real. She typed back, "I'm in." The event was held in a quiet community center. No flashing lights. No cameras. Just folding chairs, nervous faces, and a microphone that looked a little too tall for her. Keanu stood at the back of the room, giving her a small nod. He didn't have to say anything. His presence was enough. When Emily stepped up to the mic, her palms were sweaty. Her voice shook at first, but then she saw a girl in the front row, blonde hair, wide eyes, biting her nails just like Emily used to. She took a deep breath. "Hi, my name is Emily. I used to believe I was invisible." And the room leaned in. She spoke for 15 minutes, about pain, about fear, about staying, about hope. Her voice grew stronger with every word, and when she stepped down, people didn't just clap. They stood. The girl in the front row hugged her tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "I needed to hear that. I needed you." Afterward, Keanu walked up to her, his expression soft. "You were incredible," he said. "You're not just surviving now, you're leading." She shook her head with a nervous laugh. "I didn't know I could do this." "You didn't know yet," he said. "But you do now." He paused, then added something unexpected. "Would you be open to doing it again? Somewhere a little bigger?" "How big?" He smiled. "A national student conference, 500 attendees, every one of them dealing with something heavy." Emily's breath caught in her chest. She was quiet for a long time, and then, "I'll do it." Because the trembling girl who once watched from the shadows was now a voice in the light, the stage that remembered her name. The conference was 3 weeks away, but to Emily, it felt like the hours were slipping through her fingers like sand. Some days, she woke up excited. Other days, she wanted to hide under the covers and pretend she had never said yes. The idea of 500 people staring at her made her chest tighten. She kept thinking, who am I to speak on a stage like that? But every time doubt crept in, she remembered Keanu's words. "You're not just surviving. Now, you're leading." Still, the anxiety didn't leave. It lingered like an old shadow, showing up at night when the lights went out. And it was during one of those nights, when the moonlight hit her room just right, that she sat at her small desk and opened her notebook again. This time, she didn't write a thank you letter. She wrote her story, start to finish, everything, no filters, no polish, just truth. She wrote about the hallway outside her mom's hospital room, about the smell of cleaning fluid and the sound of the monitor flatlining. She wrote about her father turning away, not knowing how to speak through grief, about nights spent staring at the ceiling, wondering if the pain would ever fade, and about the moment a stranger's voice, Keanu's voice, stopped her from making a mistake she could never undo. But she didn't stop there. She wrote about healing, about the Lightbridge Center, about Josh, about the girl in the front row who hugged her like she'd been waiting for years. And she ended the speech with this: "I am not here because I'm perfect. I'm here because I kept going. And sometimes, that's all we need to do. Just take the next breath, the next step, the next moment. Because staying is powerful." When she looked back at what she'd written, tears blurred her vision. This was more than a speech. It was a truth she needed to speak, not just for the crowd, but for herself. The day of the conference arrived with a soft drizzle. The hotel where it was being held was large and busy, with people checking in, rushing around, and practicing in empty ballrooms. Emily walked in with her small bag and a heart pounding like a drum. She wore a simple blue blouse and black jeans. Nothing fancy, just something that felt like her. Keanu met her in the lobby. No security, no cameras, just him, waiting with a warm smile and a quiet presence that somehow made everything feel lighter. "You ready?" he asked. She laughed nervously. "Not even a little," he nodded. "That's perfect. The best things happen when we're a little scared." They walked together down the long hallway toward the main room. She peeked inside and saw the chairs. Hundreds of them. A stage, lights, microphones. A sea of young people, some chatting, some sitting quietly with earbuds in. Keanu touched her shoulder gently. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be real. That's what they'll remember." And with that, he stepped back, giving her the space to choose. Emily stood. Behind the curtain, her notebook in hand. The host called her name. The applause started low, then grew louder. She took a deep breath and stepped out. The lights were bright. The room was huge, but her eyes found the faces in the front rows. Boys biting their sleeves, girls twisting their bracelets. One kid holding a journal just like hers. And suddenly it didn't feel so big. It felt personal. She walked to the mic, paused, then spoke. "Hi, my name is Emily, and 2 years ago, I wanted to disappear. You could hear a pin drop. I didn't think anyone saw me. I thought I was broken beyond repair. And then, I heard one voice. A stranger. A video clip. And he said something I couldn't forget." She looked over at Keanu, who stood in the shadows near the exit, arms crossed gently over his chest. He said, "You're still here, and being here means something." The crowd was still, listening, breathing with her. "I'm not here to give you answers. I'm here to tell you. Staying saved me. And it can save you too." She read from her notebook, her voice trembling at first, then growing. She cried. She laughed. So did the audience. By the time she finished, the room stood up as one. Not for a celebrity, but for a girl who had the courage to stay. After the talk, the line to meet Emily wrapped halfway around the room. Some asked for hugs. Some just cried. Others pressed notes into her hand, just like she once had. And for the first time in her life, Emily felt something unfamiliar, something strong. She belonged. Keanu waited until the crowd thinned. Then he walked up, arms open. They embraced like family. "You didn't just speak," he whispered. "You gave them light." She pulled back, tears running down her cheeks. "Thank you for giving me the spark." "No," he said gently. "You had it all along." They stood together, looking out at the sea of young faces, still glowing with emotion. And for the first time, Emily understood something simple and beautiful. She had gone from being a girl who trembled in the dark to a voice that lit the way for others. The ripple that reached farther. 3 weeks passed after the conference, but Emily's story didn't stop on that stage. The recording of her speech, posted quietly by one of the organizers, went viral within days. Not because of fancy editing, not because of a famous name, but because it was raw, honest. It felt like truth in a world that was starving for it. Millions of people watched the video. Teenagers, parents, teachers, even people who had never heard of Keanu Reeves. They shared it with captions like, "This saved me tonight," and "I wish someone had told me this earlier." Emily didn't try to become famous. She didn't change who she was. She still lived in her small apartment, still wore oversized sweaters, still walked to the corner store for late-night snacks. But now, her inbox was full of messages from strangers. Some were short, just, "Thank you." Others told long, heartbreaking stories. Many ended with the same line, "Because of you, I stayed." The weight of that line humbled her. It reminded her that words matter, that honesty matters, and that sometimes showing your pain can heal others in ways you never imagined. One day, as she sat at the Lightbridge Center helping Josh prepare for an art therapy session, a staff member ran in holding a phone. "Emily, someone's asking. For you. Line 2. She picked up the phone slowly. "Hello?" A deep, steady voice came through the line. "Is this Emily?" "Yes. Speaking." "This is President Connor, principal of Glen Ridge High School in New York. We watched your speech during our morning assembly. Our students haven't stopped talking about it. I know this might be sudden, but would you consider speaking at our school? We'd love to fly you here." Emily's jaw dropped. I'm honored. I've never been to New York." "Then let us be your first stop," he said. Within a week, Emily stood in a high school gym packed with over 1,000 students. The energy was different than the conference, more chaotic, more real. Some students whispered, others slouched. A few looked skeptical, but as she stepped up to the mic and opened her notebook, silence fell. She didn't speak like a teacher or a guest speaker. She spoke like someone who had been there. And when she finished, a tall girl with dark hair stood up and clapped. Soon, the whole gym followed. After the event, that same girl approached her with shaky hands. "I didn't know someone could say all the things I couldn't." Emily reached out and took her hands gently. "You don't have to say everything today, but you don't have to hide it anymore either." Back home, Keanu called her from a film set overseas. I saw the footage. "You've become a wave, Emily. A soft one, but strong enough to change shorelines." She laughed softly. "I still get scared." "Good," he replied. "Means you still care." A pause, then he added, "I'm back next week. How about coffee?" They met at the same diner, same corner booth, same warm fries on the table. He handed her a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. "Dear Emily, your voice saved lives. Would you consider writing a book with us? A collection of your talks, stories, letters, something we can share forever. We'll publish it through my foundation. No pressure. Just think about it." Her eyes filled with tears again. "You think anyone would read it?" "They already are," Keanu said. "They just don't know it's you yet." Months later, the book Just Stay was released. It was simple, raw, filled with pages of poetry, journal entries, speeches, and letters Emily had collected. The foreword was written by Keanu himself, ending with, "When Emily held out her shaking hands, she didn't know the world would hold them back. But they did. And now, we hold her words." The book climbed charts, not because it was trendy, but because it was needed. And with every interview, every signing, every stage, Emily stayed the same. Quiet, humble, kind. She kept speaking at schools, but she also began mentoring other girls and boys who had their own notebooks, their own pain, and their own stories to share. Josh started an art series based on her speeches. Lena, her old friend, came back into her life, apologizing for not knowing how to help back then. Her father, once distant and silent, read the book and showed up at one of her talks, sitting quietly in the back row. Afterward, he hugged her, longer than he ever had before. "Your mom would be proud," he whispered. And perhaps the most powerful moment came one autumn afternoon, when Emily was asked to return to the very theater where it all began. The place where her notebook first slipped from her hands. It was now a community center. The marquee outside read, "A Night with Emily, From Silence to Strength." As she stood at the front, looking out over the same sidewalk, she saw a girl sitting alone on the steps, holding a letter and crying softly. Emily walked up, knelt down beside her, and held out her hand. "Hi, I'm Emily. Do you want to talk?" The girl looked up, her eyes wide with disbelief. And just like that night months ago, the circle closed. A trembling hand was held again, and the ripple kept going. The light she became, The day Emily returned to that theater was not the end of her journey. It was the moment she truly understood what her journey meant. The girl she sat beside on the steps was named Rachel, 15 years old, soft-spoken. Her parents were going through a bitter divorce. School was a battlefield, and her brother had left home without saying goodbye. She had written a letter that afternoon. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It was a goodbye. But she saw Emily's name on the marquee. She didn't know why she stayed, only that something told her to. Maybe it was the same something that had once kept Emily from stepping off the edge. Maybe it was the whisper of hope. Faint, but still alive. Emily sat with her for over an hour. Not to give advice. Not to fix anything. Just to listen. She held her hand, just like Keanu had held hers. Steady, patient, real. And that's when Emily understood something powerful. She was no longer the girl with trembling hands. She had become the hands others reached for. As time passed, Emily's story stretched far beyond what she ever imagined. Her book, Just Stay, became a curriculum guide in schools around the world. Teachers used it to start conversations, students passed it to friends in quiet hallways, and behind every page was the heartbeat of a girl who once believed she had no voice. She traveled often now, but never for fame. She refused offers for reality shows, refused movie deals that tried to dramatize her story. She said yes only to the places that needed her, places where pain sat just beneath the surface, where someone in the back row still believed they were alone. One afternoon, she found herself on a talk show. The host asked the usual questions, but then leaned forward with one that hit deeper. "Emily, do you think meeting Keanu Reeves saved your life?" She smiled gently. "He helped me realize my life mattered. And sometimes, that's the same thing." "Do you still talk to him?" She nodded. "He sends me voice notes, never too many. Just enough to remind me I'm not walking this path alone." The host leaned back, clearly moved. "What would you say to the version of yourself from 2 years ago? The girl outside the theater with shaking hands?" Emily's eyes grew misty. "I'd tell her, it's okay to be scared, but don't give up, because one day your pain will become someone else's lifeline, and that's when you'll understand. Staying wasn't weakness. It was the strongest thing you ever did." Keanu continued working quietly behind the scenes. He visited the Lightbridge Center every few months, checking on the programs, funding new ones, always refusing to take credit. He and Emily never made a show of their friendship. It was something deeper, a quiet bond built on shared truth and mutual respect. One day he showed up at a school where Emily was speaking. She didn't know he was coming. When she finished her talk, he surprised her by walking onto the stage, slow and calm, wearing that same humble expression. The crowd erupted, but he raised a hand and silenced them. "I'm not here as a celebrity," he said. "I'm here as someone who once reached out to a stranger, and that stranger reached back and changed the world." He turned to Emily. "You remind us that kindness can spark a fire in the coldest places. And now your fire warms thousands." Tears streamed down her cheeks as the room stood in silent awe. "Thank you for staying," he whispered again. She stepped forward and whispered back, "Thank you for holding on when I couldn't." They embraced, and for a moment, the world felt still. Years passed. Emily opened a new wing at the Lightbridge Center, built with donations from people who had once been saved by her story. It was called the Stay Room, a quiet, sunlit space with books, journals, soft music, and walls, covered in letters from people who chose to stay. One wall held the original letter Emily had written that night outside the theater, framed behind glass, with a tiny note from Keanu underneath. The world was lucky she stayed. Emily still wrote in her notebook every night. Not because she was broken, not because she was scared, but because healing isn't a line. It's a circle, And stories don't end when you speak them. They begin again in others. Rachel, the young girl from the theater steps, went on to become a counselor. Josh opened an art studio for kids who needed safe spaces. Lena, her oldest friend, became Emily's tour manager, and her father. He now spoke alongside her at events, telling parents how silence can hurt and how listening can heal. But no matter how far Emily traveled, no matter how many stages she stepped on or books she signed, she never let go of the truth that started it all. Being here means something. And for every trembling hand that reached out in the dark, she was there to hold. Because sometimes the most powerful thing in the world is the light that comes from someone who stayed.